listeners. I am Imewoyo Kyomokai, and it's good to be back after a break. Well, we've been doing a lot during the break, and one of it is monitoring the 2020 budget presentation by President Muhammad Buhari at the National Assembly and actually looking at the realities of that budget. Well, today on the program, we'll be looking at two things. Budgit Nigeria, which is one of Nigeria's biggest CSOs, that's civil society groups, recently launched what it called the State of States, and that's looking at fiscal responsibility and sustainability of states. So we'll be going to that event. Actually, we're starting with that event. We'll also be going to Vienna, the OPEC meeting that held in Vienna, where Bakindo, who is the Secretary General of OPEC and Nigeria's representative in OPEC, headed the meeting. And of course, we're looking at what were the highlights of that meeting. China, looking at China's involvement in OPEC and all of that today on the program. It's a packed program. All you want to do is sit down, relax, and take notes, because especially for the State of States, there's a lot to know about. Welcome again.
And what we show here on these two charts is how these countries on the horizontal axis, their income per capita. So going from left to right, from the lowest income per capita to higher income per capita. And then on the vertical axis is actually government expenditure as a share of GDP. And what we see is that Nigeria, if you can see the red dots, it's towards the bottom of the two charts. The left-hand chart is 2012 and the right-hand chart is 2016. What it means is that Nigeria is an outlier in the sense that its spending government spending as a percentage of GDP is way lower than other countries at similar income per capita level. And the reason behind this, and I think you're all very well aware of this, is because of the exceptionally low revenues that Nigeria collects. So Nigeria's total revenue to GDP is around 8% of GDP, and that includes oil. Non-oil is about 4% of GDP. VAT is less than 1% of GDP. Typically, other countries are looking at more than 5% of GDP in VAT collection. So bottom line is that the low revenues means that the total amount for Nigeria to spend on things like human capital is limited. Now, these low levels of spending on human capital contributes to poor development outcomes. The World Bank recently launched the Human Capital Index that measures how human capital contributes to productivity. It captures three main indicators: survival, education, and health. Despite some progress against some of the indicators, Nigeria is lagging in all three components. And out of 157 countries, Nigeria ranks 152nd. I hear some murmurs in the audience. I think it all deserves it. I mean, this is quite a very shocking result, and we should be shocked.
In this State of States in 2019, we've looked at really three key areas, or three key things. First of all, we've looked at fiscal data accessibility. What documents, financial documents, are available on states' websites and are easily accessible. The second thing we've then looked at is we've looked at states' fiscal sustainability, right? And though that has several components, in short, it looks at, are states able to pay their recurrent expenditure, their operating cost, with their revenues, right? Both independently of federal allocation and also with federal allocation. Last but not least, we also look at in that sustainability, we also look at debt burden, right? Because that's an important portion. It's not only important to look at are states able to meet their recurrent expenditure, but you also need to make sure that you as a state don't have so much debt that is dragging you down. To round this triplet as we're off, right? That of fiscal transparency and accessibility and fiscal sustainability. We've also looked at health metrics of states. And what we're trying to understand here is where are states health-wise? Why is this important? This is important because anything that happens on the sustainability end of things, if you're able to generate greater revenue, if you're able to release more money, what that means is you have more to invest in key sectors of the economy, including human capital investments such as health sector. So this year we've also done a deep dive into health. So we looked at several metrics across three broad areas: child metrics, reproductive metrics, and health delivery metrics. But I'll say the key one that we presented in our presentation was that of doctor density. We see a situation where Nigeria, on the average, we have 2 doctors per 10,000. Now, this is great. This is far lower than the world average of 15 doctors per 10,000. And what that means, right, is that we need to think about how do we retain the doctors that we have, because right, flight is also an issue, and also how do we also attract more to that sector, to that critical sector. Now, of course, we also saw across the board that the national average for health metrics were not at par with either the national target that strategic documents had set as standards, as well as world averages as well. So I would say doctor density, for its quick one, is one metric where we see across the board need for improvement. So a key one is investment, right? And I think we've also been discussing that this is not only going to reflect in the capital expenditure, but also in the recurrent expenditure. The question is, are you as you mentioned, are you investing enough in your health sector across the board, training, recruitment, not only in terms of doctors density, but all the other metrics, facilities, and so forth. And secondly, what are we doing to attract doctors to say? What are we doing to stay the issue of flight, doctor flight, not only internationally, right, but also state by state, right? Because a lot of doctors gravitate towards more urban areas, and the needs are high, right, all across the country. Because as we know, right, health issues knows no person, it knows no region. The thing is, comparing with our last report, we have a methodological change, which therefore makes straight-on comparison a bit tricky, right? So what's the methodological change which we have outlined? In previous years, because we've not had states' actual spend, we have looked at the budgeted spend. But as we know, there's a lot of budget unrealism where a state can have 1.4 trillion as a budget and have nowhere near 80 billion as the expenditure. So this year, because of availability of actual expenditure, we've then used that information to ask the same question. But what that means is that then comparison against last year becomes like you can make it, but it's not as straightforward. We are emphasizing and we are encouraging increased allocation, but we also have to remember quality of spend, right? So it's not enough to only allocate more. That is a step in the right direction, that's true. But also to see how is it being spent. Are you using it in the critical areas, and is it having a desirable change? So I wouldn't want to make an overarching statement to say, increase to X amount, and you definitely be able to see improvements in your health metrics. But that is one step, and then you look at how exactly in the ministry, in the health, generally health, are we investing? Are we spending what we're spending on health, right? For example, in the health ministry, as well as in nutrition, across the board, everything that looks at health, asking the question, right? All the money, all the pool of money that we have for that, how much of it is going to administrative costs, right? How much of this is going to administrative costs? How much of it is going to recurrent expenditure, to personnel cost that is not necessary, right? So there's a difference between spending a lot on administrators in the in the Ministry of Health, right? And it's a different thing spending on doctors. And it's not that you don't need administrators, no, but it's like, are they the right size? So there's a question about right sizing the personnel in administrative departments so that you make sure that you can release cash flow for the service delivery components. So here, right, it's about dialogue, right? And I don't, for us, our role is to shine a light, is to shine a torch, to provide insights, right? And then to help, in order to help governments to see, okay, how can we use this information to improve scenarios? Going into dialogue and going to deeper dialogue. We already dialogue, but going to deeper dialogue and more sustained dialogue is what we are and are going to continue doing.
Now, this is a sample of what you will see for each state. We've done a 3-year view as at October 1st, and you see which of these states have with their state budgets, the citizen budget implementation report, and audited financial reports available for this time period. And it's important to note when looking at this, many states will have 2017-2018 citizen reports marked unavailable. But that's fine because it is a new development that we're hoping to see more states take the time to break down the information and condense several pages of a document into few for citizens. So this is a sample of what you see for each state. Now moving on to fiscal sustainability. Now this has been the core of what we've been doing for the last 3 years. As an overview, to give you an overview of the methodology we've used in getting to our sustainability index and ranking, we've used 3 key components. This is the methodology we've been using for the last years. We've used 3 key indices with different weights, and we'll go into them in more detail, but as an overview, the index A looks at how are states able to meet their recurrent expenditure with state-owned resources. Secondly, and that is given 35%, the bulk of the weight is given to Index B, which asks the question, how are states able to meet their recurrent expenditure with both the IGR and all federal allocations? And in the Index C looks then at the debt burden, asking how long in years does it take for states to pay off outstanding debts with today's revenues. So going briefly into a little more detail for each of these indices, running through this briefly. So in Index A, we have, yes, we look at states' ability to meet their recurrent expenditure with state-owned revenue incomes. However, it's important to note that we not only use the internally generated revenue, but we have also added VAT as well, and 30% share of all derivation. And why we've done this for VAT is, yes, it is collected at it is allocated to states from the federal level, at the federal level in Nigeria. However, that VAT value addition happens all across the state, all across the subnational level. So we felt it was important to include this here to give them that boost. Also, 13% share of oil derivation going to oil-producing states, also to count for the fact that those revenue streams come from their states. So for all the states that do produce oil, we counted that for them. So when we look at, this is an overview of Index A alone. So when we see in Index A, the green stands for those states that can meet their sustainable, that can meet their recurrent expenditure only with IGR, VAT, and for those states that are producing 13% of share of oil derivation. And we see that only 3 states out of 36 can do this. And what this means is that, if there were to be drastic oil price fluctuations and productions, and the allocations from the center were to reduce, then many states would be in jeopardy. And not even only this 36 states, but we also look at the fact that all 3 states in the top three who can actually meet their recurrent obligations with state-owned revenues are also oil producing, which means also any fluctuations and issues with oil would also affect them. So this paints a kind of a cautionary tale and a need to explore really growing IGR greatly. So if we look at this, even number 2 and 3, Rivers and Akwa Ibom, they're 70% of the IGR, 30%, and VAT for Rivers is still going to recurrent, and Akwa Ibom 90%. So Lagos is really the one that is able to spend less than half of its internally generated revenues, state-owned revenues on recurrent expenditure.
We're particularly pleased as Kaduna to note some of the movements that have happened from the first report of budget to this current one, where you can clearly see that Kaduna is now in a much better fiscal standing than when we started this report. I think when we started, we had a couple of reds showing that we were not a fiscally viable state, and we had a shouting match with Sheol at the time, but it is something that we have taken on board, and we've continued to make reforms to be able to drive that and become more fiscally sustainable. So we're quite happy today that if you take out the oil producing states, Kaduna is actually then number 3. And I think which is an analysis that needs to be done. Because I think the oil factor, I think, distorts what states are actually doing, not just what is coming to them in terms of revenue. Now, for us in Kaduna, this has been a very important journey. In 2014, before we came into government, one of the major things that we saw that was very, very worrying was that the state had spent, in terms of actual expenditure that year, 300 million naira total for its health sector, and in that same year had spent 3 billion naira on government house alone in terms of recurrent spending, and that was something that we were very determined to change. You cannot spend such a pittance on healthcare for 9 million people and spend in the same year 3 billion naira for a few occupants at the seat of government. So this recurrent capital expenditure mix became very critical and important for us in our journey, and the first thing that we did was to sit down in 2015 and do what we then described as a zero-based budget. For us, that was the first way for us to really get control of the spending of the state and really push through some very important cost-cutting measures. One of the major things that we did, for example, was when we came in, we found out that the cost for vehicles across the system was different from one MDA to the other. The same vehicle would cost 10 million naira in Ministry of Health, and it would be 16 million naira in Ministry of Finance. So one of the things that we did was we consolidated all vehicle line items to the Ministry of Finance to coordinate and get better prices through framework agreements with suppliers. The same thing with air conditioners, the same thing with desks and chairs. All those things that were common services across ministries, departments, and agencies, we consolidated and moved them to single lines where they could be negotiated better. Training, for example, which is a very huge racket within the civil service, was consolidated under the Office of the Head of Service. Because we found out that engineers, for example, were going for trainings meant for accountants and vice versa. Because training is a chance to get some DTA and ESTA codes and travel out of the country. So now for you to access the training budget, you have to justify why you need to do the training to the Head of Service, who is in charge of the general capacity of the civil service and then takes a determination whether or not you need to go for that. So a number of these things we pushed through to get some efficiency, but we also realized very clearly that for us to push development to Kaduna, we needed to ensure that we were moving more resources outside of government rather than inside of it. So we adopted the budgeting practice of ensuring that we were spending a minimum of 60% on capital expenditure and 40% on recurrent. Now that's been tough to maintain, especially when it comes to actual, because I think some of the mistakes that we make generally, not only within government but also civil society, is to think that recurrent spending is only strictly spending on government. When you talk about human capital, for example, which is the topic that you're linking this report to today, most of the spending on human capital is recurrent expenditure in terms of skills building, in terms of training our own citizens, in terms of salaries for expanding healthcare and education. For example, if you look at the gap that was shown to us regarding doctor-patient ratio, doctor-population ratio, for you to do a massive expansion of that, you are talking about hiring much more doctors. So in that year, your recurrent spending is going to go one way, up. So it's something that we really need to consider and calculate. When you talk about doing massive human capital building exercises in a year, for example, we want to do digital skills training for young people. We want to do technical vocational studies for older. We want to do adult education. All that is going to hit the recurrent side of your budget. So I think that's something that we also need to look at very, very closely.
And my personal responsibility is growing investments in Ekiti. We recognize that we have to go at this one very clearly and very deliberately, because the fundamental driver of IGR growth is economic activity. So when we went around the 16 local governments in the state, we realized that outside of Ado Ekiti, Ikere, Oye Ekiti, there was very little economic activity happening. But those 3 local governments that had some economic activity happening had that because there were tertiary institutions in that location. So one of the things we've nailed ourselves to is building on our knowledge economy. We recognize that we have 6 tertiary institutions in the state. And I mean, one of our claims to fame as Ekiti people is if you check in every family or household there, you find one professor, maybe 2 or 3 in some. So we're very keen to build on that knowledge capital. So one of our primary focus areas is building a knowledge zone around a quadrangle that now has Afe Babalola University, which is one of Nigeria's better private universities, our Federal University in Oye, our Ekiti State University in Ado Ekiti, and the Federal Polytechnic. So we found that one way to grow our economy is to make ourselves attractive for tertiary and secondary education. And that brings in parents, it brings in an economic activity of itself. So building an economy around education is one way to go. Another thing that we realized is our smallholder farmers are scattered and lack capacity to grow their yields aggressively. So again, it's a debate we need to have. We need to spend some money on improving irrigation. We need to spend some money on improving the access to inputs, on mechanizing. And when we got into Ekiti State, for example, the entire state had 1 tractor. And there's 40,000 hectares of land to be prepared. So there's literally no way a smallholder farmer is going to access a tractor. Because what then happens is to get 1 tractor into Ekiti, you have to go into Kwara State or go into Osun State. And it becomes prohibitive for smallholder farmers to even prepare their land. So some of the investments we have to make now is in providing mechanization support, is in providing irrigation support, is in literally spending, and those of you who are farmers will know, depending on where you are, it costs between 200 and 300,000 naira to clear a hectare. So if you want to clear 30,000 hectares, you can do the numbers. And that's a significant spend, and that money has to come from somewhere, and that's money we currently do not have. But it's an activity that we absolutely must do. So our view is that, yes, even if we're going to go to development partners, etc., a lot of the work that the development partners are going to help us with are going to be very economically productive activities. So the World Bank, for example, has invested significantly in helping us build 1,000 kilometers of rural roads. And that helps our farmers access markets, but also helps the farmers get access to inputs. Now, for me, that's a fundamental project to improving what is a largely agrarian state.
third high-level meeting of the OPEC-China Energy Dialogue was held in Vienna, Austria on October 21, 2019. The meeting was co-chaired by His Excellency Zhang Henghua, Administrator of the National Energy Administration, People's Republic of China, and OPEC Secretary General, His Excellency Mohammed Sanusi Bakindo. His Excellency Dr. Sun Xincheng, Secretary General, International Energy Forum, also delivered some opening remarks. The meeting provided an excellent platform for knowledge exchange and a deepening relationship between China and OPEC, according to both parties. China is an essential trade partner for OPEC countries, the significance of which has grown greatly in recent decades, as well as being one of the largest, fastest growing energy consumers. China has become the world's largest importer of crude oil, acquiring the majority of its oil from OPEC member countries. A strong collaboration between the parties is essential for the interests of both, as well as the global economy. The meeting discussed various topics intended to further advance relations between the two parties at both the high and technical level. It follows a technical meeting held between OPEC and the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences on August 11, 2019 at the OPEC Secretariat in Vienna. OPEC Secretary General Mohammed Sanusi Bakindo states that China is a leader in managing the energy transition and energy diversity, and that the country will continue to play a critical role in overall future energy demand. He emphasized the necessity for open, transparent, and regular dialogue and the pooling of collective expertise in order to maintain sustainable stability in the oil market necessary for the development of all economies. So I hope you've enjoyed every bit of it. We have talked and looked at state of states. We've looked at the meeting in OPEC. Global business is back, and we'll be talking a lot more about Budget 2020 next week on the program. Remember that you must put your eyes on the ground for how your government is spending